I was then arrested. You know what happened? And I was sentenced to 5 years in Egyptian prison. How did I decide to leave this group behind? The first thing that happened, and for the record I must state, Hizb ut-Tahrir is not a terrorist organization. It's an extremist organization. And the difference between that is someone can be racist and not violent, and someone can be racist and violent. Yeah? We all know that. We live with it sometimes in certain communities in America. So a bigot, a racist, can simply call you racist names. But that doesn't mean he's going to attack you. He's still a bigot. He's still an extremist. But it doesn't mean he will attack you. But he breeds that atmosphere from where violence can emerge. And it's the same with extremists. You can have an extremist, he's a bigot, he's prejudiced, but he may not attack. The minute that extremist starts attacking civilians, he becomes a terrorist. So in our case, HT is an extremist organization. And for that reason, Amnesty International, it's a global human rights organization, they took a stand of principle and they said, this young man has been through torture and imprisonment simply because of his ideas. And we don't think that's right. So we will adopt him as a prisoner of conscience and campaign for his release. So Amnesty, a group that I'd considered my enemy, you know, human rights, I had preached in over 3 countries that human rights was a soft power tool of colonialism to colonize our minds. Yeah? That this was anti-Islam. And then this group, Amnesty, began campaigning for my release. My enemies began calling for my freedom. And that was the first stage where I began softening and realizing that there is something called justice outside of Islam. There are non-Muslims who are just and fair and will treat me fairly. And I began open to reconsidering. The second thing that was important in that process was that the people I was imprisoned with, the founding fathers of the Egyptian jihadist organizations, the assassins of Anwar Sadat, the founders of Jama'at Islamiyya, these people had abandoned jihadism. They had abandoned their violent ideology and had said that Islam does not sanction terrorism, and had started to write books against terrorism and began speaking to me in prison. So for 4 years, I was locked in debate and discussion with former jihadists, arguing with them about why they are sellouts. I said, you've gone soft. Prisoners made you a sellout. There was me, this young 24-year-old, speaking to people who had been locked up for 21 years. 81, yeah? The assassination of Sadat. 2002, my arrest. They'd been in prison all of that time. I didn't know how to talk. I didn't know how to think. I grew up. I went to primary school, secondary school, university, and these people were in prison for what they believed was Islam. They had seen life. They had struggled and sacrificed. And they were telling me I was wrong, and I was saying, you're sellouts. As an arrogant young man. So naturally, in the course of the 4 years of debate, it was I who realized that I was wrong. That they had some substance to what they were saying. So in 2006, when I completed my sentence, I was released from the Egyptian jail. I went back to the UK, but I was still a leadership member of HT. I was still in their leadership committee. Because leaving wasn't so easy. I had become, my entire social circle, my family, my friends, all of them were from this group. And I was their hero. I was the man who had struggled and sacrificed for their cause. So the pressures against leaving were very severe. It took me a good few months, around 10 months, of internal wrangling, of internal self-analysis and scrutinizing, until eventually, in May 2007, I quietly, through email, sent an email to the leadership of the group and said, I resign. I no longer believe in your ideology. Islam does not sanction what you call for. And then in September 2007, I went public on the BBC's Newsnight programme with Jeremy Paxman and declared that not only did I no longer agree with the manipulation of Islam for political objectives, but would dedicate myself and my life and my energies to challenging those who abuse the good name of Islam and abuse the energy of our youth to take them down a path which leads to nothing but destruction. I gave the story of the arrest by Essex police and of my background, my childhood, and the anger that led to me joining Hizb ut-Tahrir in the first place. And the next day, my mother received a knock on the door from Essex police authorities. She opened the door, she said, "What's wrong?" And they said, "We saw your son on the news yesterday and he spoke about when he was arrested at 15. We just want to say we're very sorry." 15 years later, they came personally to apologize. But this is a background to us setting up Quilliam. We decided that we would use the organizational tactics and skills and the inside knowledge that we learned in setting up these movements and the arguments that we know how they use their arguments and the narratives they employ, that we would use those arguments and reverse them to turn the tide against the extremists. In the spirit of the hadith that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said in Sahih Bukhari, where he warned us of everything I've told you about. He said, إِيَّاكُمْ وَالْغُلُوَّ فِي الدِّينِ إِيَّاكُمْ وَالْغُلُوَّ فِي الدِّينِ Beware of extremism in your religion. Now I give these presentations in Pakistan, where, as you know, there's a big problem. And I get told by some young Pakistani Muslims, this extremism, it's a Western agenda. Don't talk to us about extremism. And I say to them, you have just insulted the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. You have just insulted the founder of our deen because he warned us against extremism. Are you saying he's a Western puppet? When the Prophet ﷺ 1400 years ago warned us against extremism, is because he predicted that some people would abuse Islam for their own political objectives. Those very same extremists, known as the Khawarij, they killed the Sahaba. He warned us and said, beware of extremism. Don't deny that it exists. Don't stand there in denial and pretend there's no such thing as extremism within Muslims. We know what extremism is. We have to be frank and open about that. So in the spirit of that hadith, we set up Quilliam for the purpose of implementing this hadith. Amongst the Muslims to warn them about extremism and to teach and to put our experiences at the disposal of the world. To say that we've learned certain things. But there isn't just one type of extremism. There's extremism coming from our own people, and then there's the anti-Islam extremism too. But we will have no credibility. And please, I implore you to pay attention to this very carefully. We will have no credibility to complain about people burning copies of the Quran if at every given opportunity we burn the American flag or we burn books simply because we disagree with them. We will have no credibility to complain. We will have no credibility to complain about people who say Islam is a deen of violence and terrorism if we don't stand strong and condemn terrorism within our own ranks. Now I know the reasons for why we are angry. I know the reasons for why we have a lot to complain about. I know the grievances that we suffer and have suffered as Muslims, because I am an embodiment of those grievances. I am a product of those grievances. Anything you can imagine that could happen to someone to make them angry has happened to me in my life. From the racist attacks to the torture. the dictatorships that randomly pick up people off the streets and kidnap them. In front of our eyes, we had 15-year-old boys tortured in Egyptian prisons to force their fathers to confess. Wives were stripped bare and tortured in front of their husbands to force the husbands to confess. I know the reasons that make us angry. But we will have no credibility if we complain about these grievances and ignore and turn a blind eye to our own oppressive behavior. Because justice, it begins by the very important principle. Many of you will know this story. When one time somebody approached the Prophet ﷺ and said, "Please ask my child to stop eating sweets." Has anyone heard this story? "My child eats too many sweets. Please, Ya Rasulullah, tell him to stop eating sweets." And Rasulullah ﷺ said, "No, I can't." And the mother, she said, "Why?" He said, "Because I eat sweets myself, and that would be hypocritical. Come back to me in a few months' time when I stop eating sweets and then ask me this question." Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swears in the Quran upon many, many things. By the way, at this stage I want to say to you, I'm no religious preacher, I'm no religious leader. I'm giving you the examples just to demonstrate one thing, that this narrative is not alien to Islam. If you want religious guidance, go to your mosque imam, not to me. But what I can do is show you that what I'm saying does not contradict Islam. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swears in the Quran, He swears on many, many things. The things He swears upon are very, very important. You know, we read the Quran, we see Allah swears by the sun, by the stars, and by the moon. وَالشَّمْسِ وَالضُّحَى وَالنَّجْمِ. Allah swears by the things of creation to make us think. One of the things He swears upon, which demonstrate the power and the significance of this, is وَالنَّفْسِ اللَّوَّامَةِ. وَالنَّفْسِ اللَّوَّامَةِ. Allah swears upon the self-reproaching soul. It's up there with the beauty of the moon, the majesty of the sun, the miracle of the stars, the seas and the oceans, is the self-critical soul. The soul that criticizes its own self. وَالنَّفْسِ اللَّوَّامَةِ. Lawwama from low. Some of you have basic Arabic. Low means to blame. Lawwama means to blame yourself very much. So when we Muslims are critical of dictatorships and torture and invasion and occupation and war, we have to, because that's our duty, to amr bil ma'roof wa nahy anil munkar, to command the good and to forbid the bad. But what we also have to do at the same time, without neglecting that side, is to criticize ourselves as well. And we know there is extremism in our ranks. We know that people are misinterpreting Islam to justify their political objectives. And it's in that spirit and with that cause and with that aim in mind that we established Quilliam, to clearly distinguish Islam, the faith, from Islamism, the politicization of Islam. What they say in Arabic is Islamawiyya, Islamiyin, the Islamists. The Jihadiyin is not the same as the Mujahideen. The Mujahideen are those who fight true jihad. The Jihadiyin are those who politicize jihad. And so I end with saying to you all that we're challenging the two extremisms. Muslims, who are some of them, the minority of Muslims, who are abusing the good name of our faith by being extremists, and the anti-Islam extremists. Both have to be challenged so that we can preserve the middle ground, the wasat. And in this spirit, not only do we work within Muslim communities to challenge extremism,